little fox.
A Christmas Carol, Part 1.
Late in the afternoon one Christmas Eve, Ebenezer Scrooge and his clerk Bob Cratchit were hard at work. Ebenezer Scrooge was perhaps the cheapest, most cold-hearted, mean-spirited man that ever lived. He had no friends. On the street, not even the beggars would beg from him. Cratchit was a good and honest man, but working for Scrooge had kept his family poor. Cratchit was working as hard as he could, but it was difficult because Scrooge kept the office terribly cold. He was too cheap even to buy coal. Suddenly, they heard a cheerful cry.
Merry Christmas, Uncle!
It was Scrooge's nephew. Being surprised, being interrupted, and hearing the words, Merry Christmas, all angered Scrooge.
Ah, humbug!
He replied.
Christmas a humbug, Uncle?
His nephew laughed.
Christmas is for fools who waste their money.
Grunted Scrooge.
There is no profit.
To this, his nephew replied,
Christmas is a time to remember the birth of Jesus and to be kind, forgiving, loving, and pleasant to others. It is a time to know that all people are brothers and sisters. While it may not bring me profit, I say God bless Christmas.
Ah, humbug!
Scrooge replied. With a smile, his nephew asked,
Would you at least come to dinner with us tomorrow?
No, I will not. Now, good afternoon.
Snorted Scrooge.
Merry Christmas, Uncle,
replied his nephew with a smile. With that, his nephew left, and two gentlemen walked in.
Mr. Scrooge, we are taking a Christmas collection for the poor,
said one of the gentlemen.
Many have little or nothing to live on.
To this, Scrooge replied,
Are there no prisons or workhouses?
Mr. Scrooge, most people would rather die than go to those terrible places,
replied the gentleman.
If they would rather die, then fine,
declared Scrooge.
Let them die. I will not waste my money on helping people who are lazy. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Shocked and disgusted, the men quickly left. Then, looking at his watch, Scrooge realized that it was time to close the office.
I guess you want tomorrow off,
said Scrooge with a sigh.
It is Christmas, sir,
replied Cratchit.
Ah, humbug! It is a poor excuse,
said Scrooge.
You'd better be here very early the next day.
With that, the office was locked, and Scrooge went home to his dreary, lonely house. Scrooge once had a partner named Jacob Marley, but on Christmas Eve, 7 years before, Marley had died. Marley and Scrooge were similar in that they both had no friends, no family, and no hearts. Scrooge was the only one at Marley's funeral, and even he was not very sad. In fact, shortly after Marley died, Scrooge completely stopped thinking about him. That is why it was quite strange that, when Scrooge arrived at his house, the old knocker on his front door turned into the living face of Jacob Marley. Startled, Scrooge looked again and saw just a knocker.
Pooh-pooh,
said Scrooge, thinking that he was acting silly. Without another thought, he entered and sat by a very low fire. Suddenly, an old servant bell next to the fireplace began to ring loudly, giving Scrooge a shock. This was followed by a terrible noise, and then, through the locked door, came a ghost.
What do you want?
Declared Scrooge, trying to sound stern.
Much,
said the ghost.
Who are you?
Asked Scrooge.
Who was I?
Replied the ghost.
I was your partner, Jacob Marley. Listen carefully, Ebenezer,
said Marley sternly.
In life, everyone must love others and help those in need. If not, after death, he is condemned to search the earth.
I spent my entire life in our office counting money, and I never knew love or charity. Now I must wander the earth, trying to make up for my selfish life, but it is too late. I see a poor woman with no food for her babies. I want to give her some money, but I can't. I must sit and watch her suffer.
Scrooge began to shake with fear because he knew he was the same.
I am here tonight to help save you from my fate,
said Marley.
Thank you.
Replied Scrooge.
You were always a good friend.
You will be haunted by 3 ghosts,
said Marley.
They will come to you in your sleep.
Ghosts? I want no more ghosts,
replied Scrooge. Marley repeated,
They are your only chance to escape my pain. The ghosts will come.
With that, the ghost of Marley left. Exhausted from the terrible fright and not knowing what was true, Scrooge climbed into bed and went to sleep.
A Christmas Carol, Part 2.
Scrooge awoke to a bright light. In front of him was a strange old man. In some ways he looked ancient, but he had young childlike features and was dressed in summer flowers.
Are you the first ghost that Molly predicted?
Asked Scrooge.
Yes, I am the ghost of Christmas past,
replied the ghost.
Tonight you will see images of your past, but they will have no awareness of us. Come with me.
The ghost kindly took Scrooge's hand and walked into the past. Scrooge could hear his old employer, Mr. Fezziwig, yelling out,
Ebenezer! Dick! Come here, boys! No more work for today. It's Christmas Eve. Give me a hand and let's clear away the desks for a party.
Old Scrooge could not believe how young and happy he used to look. Well, it was a grand party. Mrs. Fezziwig, the cook, and the maid came in with food and drinks for everyone. Then the rest of the men and women who worked for the company were invited. They had a dance and a feast. Scrooge danced with the prettiest girl all night. Old Scrooge shed a tear as he remembered the happy old days.
We must move on,
said the ghost of Christmas past.
Can't I just have a few more minutes?
Pleaded Scrooge.
I'm sorry,
replied the ghost. Then Scrooge saw himself a little older, sitting with the girl who he had danced with. Crying, she said,
You have another love now.
No,
replied Scrooge.
you are the only woman.
It's not a woman you love. It's gold you love,
she said.
So go to your true love.
Angrily, old Scrooge shouted,
Get me out of this place! Take me back!
The ghost nodded, and Scrooge was again sleeping in his bed. But it seemed only minutes later that Scrooge was awoken by a bright light from his living room. In the room, a fire was burning brightly. Sitting by the fire was a jolly ghost, eating meat and drinking wine.
Come join me.
He called.
I am the ghost of Christmas present.
Lead me, spirit.
Said Scrooge.
Tonight I have learned many things. I'm sure you will teach me more. Touch my robe,
replied the ghost. Immediately, Scrooge and the ghost left the house and were standing in Bob Cratchit's tiny living room. Scrooge counted 4 children.
How does Bob feed them all on his salary?
Scrooge wondered aloud. Mrs. Cratchit was dressed in a poor and simple dress, but she had a smile as she cooked the Christmas turkey, prepared the gravy, and dished out the applesauce. "Where is your father?" she asked. "Church should be finished by now."
Here he comes!
Shouted 4 children at once. In came Bob Cratchit carrying Tiny Tim. Tiny Tim was very sick, and his legs never did work. But Bob loved him because he had a gentle heart. Soon all 7 were seated and ready to eat. Scrooge had never seen such a warm and loving sight. Even though their clothes were nearly rags and their house was humble, it was the most handsome family Scrooge had ever seen. At the end of the meal, Bob raised his glass, saying,
A Merry Christmas to all of us! God bless us!
Then Tiny Tim repeated,
God bless everyone!
Surprising Scrooge, Bob said,
To Mr. Scrooge, who gave us the money for this meal.
Mr. Scrooge? No, replied his wife. He gives us almost nothing. Bob looked sternly at his wife and said,
It's Christmas.
Fine, said his wife more politely. To Mr. Scrooge. At that, the ghost touched Scrooge and they were in another house. He could hear the laughter of his nephew.
He said that Christmas was a humbug,
cried Scrooge's nephew.
Shame on him!
Declared his pretty wife.
How terrible of him to be rude to you when you are trying to be kind to him.
Well, it only hurts him,
replied Scrooge's nephew.
Here we sit with each other in good food, and he is in his lonely house. I feel sorry for him.
Well, don't!
Exclaimed his wife.
Bah humbug to him!
And they laughed. Even old Scrooge laughed. He was a humbug, but he would change. Then the scene faded, and the ghost of Christmas present flew him all over the city. They went to hospitals and workhouses and saw children suffering. In the streets they saw men and women freezing, but in the jails they saw the worst misery of all.
A Christmas Carol, Part 3.
Then the jolly ghost vanished, and a cold, dark creature in a black hood came toward Scrooge. Unlike the other ghosts, this one was not friendly. In fact, he had the look of death.
You must be the ghost of Christmas future,
inquired Scrooge. But the ghost said nothing. Pointing his bony finger, the ghost led Scrooge to a group of businessmen.
I heard he died last night,
said one man.
I wonder who will get his money,
joked another man.
He hasn't left it to me. That's all I know,
said the first man, and he walked off.
Why are you showing me this?
asked Scrooge. But still the black ghost said nothing. Then they went to a group of servants.
Since he's dead, he doesn't need this. Quick, let's each take something,
declared one maid.
He doesn't have any friends to claim his things,
she continued.
We worked in his miserable house, so we earned it,
said another. Scrooge watched in disgust as the servants divided silver spoons and other expensive things among themselves. Scrooge turned to the ghost, saying,
I see. This could be me if I do not change.
The ghost of Christmas future took Scrooge to Bob Cratchit's house. This time there was less joy there.
Did you visit Tiny Tim today, Father?
asked one of the children sadly.
Yes, and I brought some flowers for his grave,
he replied.
It is beautiful there,
said Bob with a tear. For the first time ever, Scrooge felt true sorrow in his heart.
Poor Bob,
he thought.
He did love that boy.
Then, leaving that scene, Scrooge and the ghost traveled to a dreary graveyard. The spirit brought him to a grave where a coffin was being placed. There was no one there except a workman. Before Scrooge would look at the name on the new gravestone, he asked the ghost,
Spirit, tell me this. Are these the things that will be or the things that might be.
The ghost made no response. Scrooge continued.
But if a man changes, then surely his future changes, right? If not, why would you visit me?
The ghost pointed to the grave. There on the gravestone was his name, Ebenezer Scrooge. With a loud cry, Scrooge declared,
This is not I! I am not this lonely man! No! I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. I will love others and help the poor. Please, give me another chance.
pleaded Scrooge. At that, the dark ghost faded away in a puff of smoke. Scrooge found himself back in his bedroom. It was a bright, crisp morning. He was alive and a completely new man. He opened his window and shouted to a boy walking along the street.
My good boy, what day is it today?
Why, it is Christmas,
replied the puzzled boy.
Excellent,
Shouted Scrooge.
I haven't missed it. My good boy, do you know the shop that has the very big turkey in its window?
Asked Scrooge.
Of course.
Responded the boy.
An intelligent boy. Go and buy it and bring it here.
Said Scrooge.
Come back in less than 5 minutes and I'll give you half a crown.
The boy was off like a shot.
I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's.
Laughed Scrooge.
Ha ha! He would know who sent it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim.
Then Scrooge dressed himself in his best clothes and went to visit his nephew. Before he could change his mind, he ran up and knocked on the door.
Uncle Scrooge?
Said his nephew with great surprise.
If you are willing to have me, I'd like to dine with you tonight.
Said Scrooge. Scrooge's nephew almost shook his hand off because he was so pleased. Never did Scrooge have so much fun as he did that day. He ate and talked like he had never done before. After that Christmas day, Scrooge became a different man. To Bob Cratchit, he became a wonderful employer. Bob's family suffered no more, and Scrooge provided money to help Tiny Tim, who did not die. In the city, he became known for his kindness and friendship. He put his money toward work to help the poor and suffering. He never saw the ghosts again. From that day on, it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well. May that be said of all of us. And as Tiny Tim said,
God bless everyone.
The Nutcracker, Part 1. It was Christmas Eve. Fritz, Marie, and their godfather were sitting next to the Christmas tree.
Godfather, what's that present?
Asked Fritz curiously. Fritz pointed to a very big red and green box. Open it and see, replied their godfather. Fritz and Marie opened their gift. It was an old wooden nutcracker shaped like a man.
He's kind of ugly,
Said Fritz, disappointed. The nutcracker's legs were too short, and his head was too big. This nutcracker wasn't always ugly, said Godfather.
I like this funny-looking nutcracker,
Said Marie.
What happened to him?
Once upon a time, Godfather began, there was a king and a queen who lived in a palace. The queen was in the kitchen when suddenly a very large mouse burst in. It was not any ordinary mouse, but the queen of the mice. The mouse queen squeaked, Queen, may I have some bacon? The kind queen replied, Of course. But the mouse queen was cunning. She quickly called all her family and friends. Hundreds of mice filled the kitchen. The mice ate everything in sight. The queen tried to chase them away, but there were too many. She ran out screaming. Later, the king ordered mousetraps to be set all around the palace. All of the mice, except for the Mouse Queen, died in the mouse traps. The Mouse Queen was furious at the king and the queen. All the mice were dead. That night, when the king and queen were eating, the Mouse Queen jumped onto the table. She shrieked at them, "When you have a baby, I will take my revenge." Later, when Princess Pirlipat was born, everyone was overjoyed. Everyone except the queen. She was afraid of the Mouse Queen's revenge. For 10 years, 8 nurses and 8 cats guarded the princess day and night. Meanwhile, the Mouse Queen had a son of her own, but she never forgot her plan of revenge. One night, when the nurses and cats were sleeping, the Mouse Queen snuck into the nursery. She whispered a magic spell, and the beautiful princess became ugly. The princess's head became larger than her body, and her mouth grew until it was the largest part of her face. The king and queen were very upset, so the king asked his wise men for help. They agreed there was only one solution. The king must find a nut made out of solid gold. The wise men also told the king to find a handsome Nutcracker man. The Nutcracker must open the golden nut and give it to the princess. Then he must take 7 steps backward. When he does, the Mouse Queen's spell will be broken. The king's men searched everywhere, and eventually they returned with a golden nut and a Nutcracker man. The king looked at the Nutcracker and said, "Nutcracker, if you break the magic spell, I will give you my kingdom. If Princess Pirlipat wishes, she may marry you." The Nutcracker man did not answer. He only stared ahead. The king's men carried the Nutcracker and the golden nut into the princess's room. Many people watched as the Nutcracker cracked the nut. He gave it to the princess, closed his eyes, and started to walk 7 steps backward. Suddenly, there was a loud gasp, but the Nutcracker kept his eyes closed. The Mouse Queen had appeared. Her eyes glittered with anger as she glared at the Nutcracker. The Nutcracker was just about to take his 7th step when the Mouse Queen stuck out her bony leg and tripped him. The Nutcracker stumbled and fell, but as he fell, his sword cut the Mouse Queen's neck. She shrieked in pain and cried out, "This spell has changed because the Nutcracker man has fallen. The princess will become beautiful, but the Nutcracker will be ugly instead." The Nutcracker, Part 2. Fritz and Marie looked at the Nutcracker in amazement. They listened eagerly as their godfather continued the tale. Inside the princess's nursery were the king, queen, the Nutcracker, and a small crowd of people. And, of course, there was the Mouse Queen, who had just tripped the Nutcracker. The princess was beautiful again, but the once handsome Nutcracker was now ugly. The Mouse Queen lay on the nursery floor. As she slowly died, she muttered, "I will have my revenge. Even though I may die, my son will never forget." But everyone ignored her and rejoiced that the princess was beautiful again. Many years passed. The Nutcracker lived in the palace and was a good and kind young man. Before long, it was time for the princess to get married. The king reminded her that she must marry the Nutcracker, but she refused. "He is too ugly," she protested. The king and queen could not change the princess's mind, so they asked the Nutcracker to leave the palace. Reluctantly, he agreed and left.
Where is the Nutcracker man now?
Marie asked. "He's right here," said Godfather. The children gasped and inspected the Nutcracker more closely.
I don't think he's ugly. He just looks different. There's nothing wrong with that,
said Marie.
I think the princess worried too much about looks. She should remember that people can be beautiful on the inside.
"You're a good girl, Marie," said her godfather.
What happened to the mice?
Asked Fritz.
The Mouse Queen said her son would take his revenge.
"Oh, he did," said their godfather. "But that's a story for another night. It's late, and you must go to bed now. Tomorrow's a big day. It's Christmas,"
I'm not tired,
said Fritz.
and I can't sleep until I know the story's ending.
"I'll tell you this," said their godfather in a whisper. "The Mouse King and the Nutcracker fought in front of the Christmas tree, and the Nutcracker won. Now go to bed, my dears." Marie was tired, but she was glad the Nutcracker had defeated the Mouse King. She slept and dreamed of kings and queens and princesses and mice. In the middle of the night, Marie woke suddenly because she heard voices in the living room. Marie quickly got out of bed. The living room was dark except for the dim glow coming from the fireplace, but it was enough to see something moving near the Christmas tree. There was a strange shadow on the wall. Marie was scared. Then Marie saw him. It was the Mouse King, son of the Mouse Queen. His eyes glowed red, his face was like a rat's, and he wore a crown of rubies. The Mouse King looked across the room and he called out, "I have to avenge my mother's death. Are you ready?" The Nutcracker advanced without speaking. He seemed to be smiling. The Mouse King swiftly drew his sword and charged the Nutcracker. Marie screamed, but the Nutcracker also drew his sword and easily dodged the Mouse King's first attack. The Mouse King and the Nutcracker battled back and forth across the living room floor. Their tiny swords clashed in the dim light. Marie had one hand over her mouth and one hand over her eyes, but she could see everything between her fingers. Both the Nutcracker and the Mouse King fought hard and long. Marie knew someone would make a deadly mistake soon. She saw the Nutcracker fall and gasped. She had to act. Marie pulled off her shoe and hurled it straight at the Mouse King. Her shoe hit him in the head. Poof! Like magic, the Mouse King was gone, but the Nutcracker was gone too.
"The battle is over,"
said a handsome prince standing next to her.
Yes,
Said Marie.
but where is the Nutcracker?
"I am here.
Said the handsome man.
I am the Nutcracker."
But my Nutcracker was ugly. You are so handsome.
Exclaimed Marie.
"The Mouse Queen's spell is finally broken,"
Said the Nutcracker. The Nutcracker prince looked at Marie with his kind eyes and gentle smile. Marie's eyes twinkled as she said,
Merry Christmas, Nutcracker. Marie, get up!
called Fritz. He came into the living room.
Why are you sleeping here?
Marie slowly sat up.
Where's the handsome prince?
She asked. Then she realized it was all a dream. She smiled. Godfather had given her 2 gifts this Christmas, a Nutcracker and his story.
The Snowman. He stood as silent and white as the snow. His blue eyes were triangle-shaped. They were old tiles from a wall or floor. One eye hung close to his carrot nose. A large old comb had become his mouth. The uneven teeth made it appear as though he were frowning. Inside, however, the snowman was smiling. He was alive.
My, how cold it is today!
The snowman exclaimed happily.
Woof! How can you be happy that it's cold?
Barked Dog. Even Dog's fur could not keep him warm.
What do you mean?
Snowman was confused.
Everyone loves the cold winter. Just look at those children!
3 boys were having a snowball fight. Other children rode down a hill on sleds. They were all shouting with joy.
See? The cold makes everyone feel alive,
said Snowman.
Woof! Not everyone likes the cold.
Dog lifted his head toward the shining sun.
The sun's rays beamed down on the icy snow. Drops of water formed where the warm rays touched the snow.
What is that?
Snowman asked as he looked up at the sky. Snowman did not feel comfortable.
It is called the sun,
Dog answered.
See how it glows? It can melt away all this snow.
Melt? That sounds horrible!
Gasped Snowman.
I won't let it melt me!
Dog barked and barked. It sounded as though he were laughing.
We'll see about that,
Dog said nastily. Turning around 3 times, Dog went inside his doghouse. Snowman continued to watch the playful children.
I wish I could slide the way they do,
he thought to himself. All day, Snowman stood still and silent. He did not dare look up at the sky. He knew Sun was there staring at him.
I won't let Sun get me,
Snowman said firmly.
Children love the snow.
Shortly after, something wonderful happened. Sun slowly disappeared.
I won! I won!
Snowman shouted. If he had had legs, Snowman would have jumped for joy.
Woof! What are you shouting for?
Dog came out of his house, yawning and stretching.
Look! Sun has gone away! And it didn't melt me!
Snowman cried. If he had had arms, Snowman would have waved to the sky. Again, Dog laughed and laughed.
Sun will be back tomorrow, but now Moon, his friend, is here.
Dog looked up at the dark sky and howled. Snowman carefully looked up. Indeed, a white round ball had replaced Sun.
Can Moon melt snow too?
Asked Snowman.
Of course not,
barked Dog.
But Moon keeps shining, so tomorrow's Sun will know where you are.
Snowman felt afraid. He looked around. The children were all gone too.
I'm all alone,
he said sadly.
Well, too bad,
barked Dog.
I would stay, but it's time for my dinner.
Dog trotted toward the house. He barked and scratched at the door. A young boy opened it, and Dog disappeared inside. All night, Snowman stood still and silent. Early the next morning, just as Dog had said, Sun was back.
So you have returned,
Snowman said to Sun.
Well, you won't melt me today either,
Snowman shouted. Snowman watched as children came out to play again. Some stopped to look at him.
His eye is falling,
a little girl said. She pulled the hanging tile off. Then she shoved it next to the other one.
Thank you. Now I can see much better,
Snowman thought. Snowman was very happy.
Little children must like me,
he said to himself.
They come up to me and smile.
Excuse me?
A small voice called from below. Snowman looked down. It was a little rabbit.
Yes?
Snowman said.
It's very cold,
began Rabbit.
It is indeed,
Snowman said happily.
I can't find any food to eat. I just wish this horrible winter would end,
cried Rabbit. Suddenly, he saw Snowman's nose.
My, what a fine nose you have,
said Rabbit. He licked his lips. Snowman looked down at his carrot nose. Then he looked at Rabbit. Rabbit did look cold and thin.
Do you want my nose?
Snowman asked.
Oh, would you mind?
Rabbit asked eagerly.
Not at all.
Snowman said kindly. Rabbit plucked the carrot off.
Thank you so much.
Rabbit waved and hopped away. So once again, Snowman was alone. Sun stayed out all day, but he could not melt Snowman. Then Moon came out again.
I'm still here,
laughed Snowman.
Your friend Sun couldn't melt me.
Moon remained silent, but he kept his light on Snowman. Day and night, Sun and Moon took turns shining down on Snowman. Day and night, Snowman tried to keep standing straight. Then one day, something happened.
Oh, I don't feel so good,
Snowman said to Dog. Dog had not gone into the house that night. He stayed in his house outside.
That's because the weather is changing,
barked Dog.
Changing? But why? Everyone loves winter,
Snowman cried.
Maybe, said Dog, but everyone loves spring too.
Spring? What is that?
Snowman asked.
Spring is the time for flowers and trees to blossom. Grass grows back, explained Dog.
But what about the snow? What about me?
Snowman asked quietly. Dog laughed and laughed.
I told you, sun will melt you away.
Snowman looked down. There was a growing puddle around his body.
But don't worry,
barked Dog.
You'll be back next winter.
I will?
asked Snowman.
Yes, you come back every winter,
said Dog. Snowman thought about Dog's words.
Will I see you next winter?
he asked. Dog turned around 3 times.
Of course,
he barked and went inside his house.
Goodbye, friend,
Snowman called out. Then he slowly disappeared.
Hansel and Gretel. There once was a woodcutter who lived in Germany. He had 2 children, named Hansel and Gretel. They lived together in a house in the forest. During the winter, the woodcutter would go deep into the forest to cut firewood. When he came home, he and Hansel and Gretel would take the firewood to town to sell it and buy food. "Goodbye, children," said the woodcutter. "I am going to cut firewood. I will come home tonight for dinner,"
Goodbye, Father,
said Hansel and Gretel, and they waved as their father walked away. Dinner time came and the woodcutter did not come home.
Where is Father?
Asked Gretel.
I don't know,
Said Hansel.
But we won't eat dinner until he comes home.
They waited and waited and waited. They waited so long they fell asleep. When they woke up, the sun was shining through the windows.
Oh no,
Said Hansel.
Father did not come home. Something must have happened. We must go look for him.
They packed some bread to eat and walked into the woods.
Wait, Hansel. How will we find our way home?
Asked Gretel.
I will leave breadcrumbs in the path to show us how to get home,
Said Hansel.
Good idea,
Gretel said. They walked for hours and hours and hours. Because they had used their bread to show the way home, they had nothing to eat.
I am getting hungry,
said Hansel.
Yes, and I am getting cold too,
said Gretel.
It is getting late. Maybe we should go home. Maybe Father is waiting there for us.
Yes, maybe he is. Let's go home.
Hansel agreed. But when they turned around to go home, they did not know which way to go.
Oh no,
said Gretel.
Our breadcrumbs are gone. How will we find our way home?
The birds must have eaten all our crumbs,
said Hansel.
Maybe home is this way,
said Gretel. They walked and walked and walked. Finally, they saw smoke coming from a chimney.
It must be Father,
the children cried, and they ran to the house. But the smoke was not their father's. It was a magical house. Its walls were made of cookies, its roof was made of peppermint, and the doors were made of chocolate.
Wow!
said Hansel and Gretel. And they began to eat the house. What Hansel and Gretel didn't know was that inside the house lived a witch. While Hansel was busy eating, the witch opened the door and grabbed him.
Who is eating my house?
asked the witch. She was very angry.
I didn't know it was your house,
said Hansel.
We're very sorry,
said Gretel.
Please, let him go.
No, he has eaten my house, and now I will eat him.
The witch dragged Hansel into a cage and locked him inside.
And you will be my servant,
she said to Gretel. Then the witch laughed a terrible laugh. The witch fed Hansel lots and lots of food to make him fat, so that he would be a delicious dinner. But the witch had very old eyes that made everything seem blurry, and she could not see if Hansel was fat. So every day she would say to Hansel,
"Put out your finger,"
and she would feel it to see if he was fat enough. Hansel was smart. He did not put out his finger when the witch asked. He saved a bone from his dinner and put that out instead. The witch would feel the bone and say,
"Not fat enough. Maybe I will eat him tomorrow."
Gretel cried every day. She didn't want her brother to be eaten. Finally, the day came.
"Put out your finger,"
the witch asked. Hansel put out the bone.
"Still not fat enough. Well, I am not going to wait. I will eat you tonight."
When Gretel heard this, she cried even harder.
"Stop crying, silly girl,"
the witch said.
"Crawl inside that oven and make a fire to cook dinner."
Gretel was smart too. She knew the witch was trying to trick her, so she said,
I don't know how to climb into an oven.
"Stupid girl,"
the witch said.
"I will show you, and then you will do it."
The witch climbed inside the oven to show Gretel, but just as she was inside, Gretel shut the oven door and locked it.
"Let me out!"
cried the witch.
"I promise not to eat you. I'm very sorry. Please let me out."
But the children did not listen to her. Gretel freed Hansel from his cage and they ran away from the witch's candy house as fast as they could. They ran and ran and ran. They saw another chimney with smoke coming out.
We must be careful, Hansel,
said Gretel. She did not want to meet another witch. They walked quietly up to the house. Just then the door opened and the woodcutter walked out.
Father! Father! Father!
They cried, and they ran to him with their arms open. He gave them a big hug.
Hansel, Gretel, where have you been? I was so worried about you.
We went looking for you, Father,
said Gretel.
Yes, you didn't come home, so we went to find you,
said Hansel.
Ah, I'm sorry, children. I broke my leg and came home the next day. But you were gone. You must never go into the forest alone. There are dangerous things in the forest.
Yes, Father. There are dangerous things in the forest,
they said. Hansel and Gretel went inside the house with their father. They decided to tell him about the witch. But first, they would eat dinner.